On receiving any order from Rumtop Railways, the first thing you must do is to remove the order checklist which is within the box. This shows you pictures of each of the components and will give you a quantity that you have ordered. Please check against your components that each of the quantity adds up and you have indeed got your complete order. Once the order has been checked, you need to wash each component with some hot soapy water. Make sure you wear gloves because there might well be some splatter or sharp edges on the bracket parts. They're still in their flat form at this stage. You haven't bent any of them up, and you clean everyone, giving them a good clean. It gets rid of any residue oil as well that might be on the surface of the steel. Once you've cleaned them all, give them a good dry, make sure they're nice and dry, ready to be painted. Now we do appreciate you might well have a very excited child and you're wanting to put the brackets up, but it is essential to paint all the brackets while they're still in their flat form. Once the brackets have been bent and indeed attached to the railway or room, they are almost impossible to paint because they're very difficult with all the little nuts and bolts on them. While they're still in flat form, lay them on an old piece of plywood once as they've been washed, and you lay them down flat, and then first of all you give them an oil based undercoat, just a thin base oil undercoat, and then you paint them with an emulsion, painting each side at a time, turning them over and painting the other side. It might be well worth involving your child at this stage, because with the emulsion paint you paint it the same colour as the room they're going to go into, and it allows the child to get involved with it at this stage, and I think it's great fun. If they're a little bit bludgy, it really doesn't matter, but it's essential to paint them now. It's far easier and it will take no time at all, just allowing them to dry, flicking them over and painting the other side. Don't ever consider putting them on a piece of cardboard or paper, because as the paint dries it will stick to the underside of them. It must be an old piece of plywood or an old hard surface that you don't mind getting paint on. Once the brackets have been painted, the next part of the instructions is to bend them. This can be found on page 1, 2 and 3 of your main instruction sheet with the drawings. However, I would like to just show you ceiling support arch and how to bend this. It's made of 3 components. The first one is what gets attached to the ceiling itself, and you just simply bend it over the edge of a table or a kitchen unit or something. This is for a flat ceiling and it gives a 90-degree bend, and you put the 2 double-sided tape on the back of there and that gets stuck to the ceiling. The strip between the two, between the track support and the ceiling, that isn't bent, but it's just cut to length at a later date. But to bend the track support itself, the arch, the way to do this is there is notches. Follow the drawings, but basically you're bending each side up vertically, so you're having a nice vertical. You bend one of the tags back a little bit again at the bend point, and you bend this one forward, and you do exactly the same on the other side, bending it back and bringing it forward. Now you might need to play around with the bends, but the idea is that you've got to try and get a symmetrical arch as possible, and the dimensions are quite important as well. What the dimensions you're trying to achieve is a width of 64 millimeters from one side to the other, and the total height is 126 millimeters. So play around with the bends and try and get a symmetrical arch with those measurements, with it held close together, and do them all at the same time, one after the other, because you will get better at it as you do a few. As Rumtop Railway secures the track to the wall or ceiling, there is no problem with using second-hand track. If you do use any second-hand track, at this point it's a good time to give it a good clean with either a lighter fuel or a light spirit. Make sure that you know the radius of curves you're using against the drawings on the instructions, and if you're in any doubt, please see our track specification video. With some track you'll find the posi pan is quite tight between the two sleepers. You could just push it up through, but it can damage the end sleeper. It's far better with this track if you get a screwdriver and you just turn the bolt, and you'll find the thread will just cut very nicely up through the sleeper. It doesn't damage either of the two sleepers, and it does lead to a very tight joint. With all posi pan bolts, when they're put through and tightened up with a screwdriver, they never come through past the top of the nuts. They're only flush with the top of the nuts at the very best. They never protrude further. If this does happen, you're either using a fine gauge track, which is no good for room top railways, or you used an 8mm posi pan, which is used for the ceiling support arch by mistake. So if they're ever proud, you're using the wrong bolt, and you must change it, because else it will hit the bottom of the train and could well damage and derail the train. With wall brackets, you can fit the wall support either below the track or above the track. We always like to see it above the track, because from a child looking up at the track, then the brackets are far less conspicuous, because the track tends to hide the top part of the bracket. Trak Kit 5 can be found on your supplement sheet, page 20. And the only thing with the instructions on this supplement sheet is these instructions start with a basic oval, and then this is an extension to a basic oval. But it's exactly the same instructions, except we're starting at position 12, because with this video we are building Trak Kit 5 from scratch. So basically you've got your straight distances along in 943. This is your first lot of radius 3 in this case going instructions, and then it drops down to radius 2 here. And basically we're going to create this in the video. We are going to put a couple of straights down the wall here, and then we're going to repeat this on the other side. But the measurements that come out from the wall for radius 3 stroke going down to radius 2 are actually on page 19 on the other side, and basically you can see the measurements off the side there, because this is you start with a basic oval in these instructions. And this is RTR 14. So we've laid out a bit of cotton horizontally along the wall, and the distance from the ceiling to the cotton we recommend to be 280mm. Now the maximum distance from the ceiling it can be is 480, because that's the maximum length that the ceiling support arch, when you go around the ceiling, can carry. So the first thing we're doing is putting this one on the wall, and you must have enough space each side to do the return hoops back to this bracket. So if we have two choices as well. We can either use radius 2 curves and drop to radius 1, or what you see on the instructions, which is radius 3 curves dropping to radius 2. So we're going along the wall, we're then coming out on the wall using radius 3 curves, and we have 6 of those, and then we come back again and we come back to another track. So this track will have 2 tracks side by side at the recommended manufacturer's distance, which is 67mm. So if we're doing it, which is on the instructions, you must have at least 1480mm, 1480mm of free ceiling space before any walls, so, because you need that ceiling space to do your return loop, and that's got to obviously be on both sides of the bracket. Now we're actually going to build here using radius 2 going out dropping to radius 1. So ours is slightly smaller, so with radius 2 dropping to radius 1, then the distance required is 1280 millimetres of space. So we need 1280 millimetres of sealing space on each side of the bracket to do the return hoop. It's very important to follow measurements, and it's very important to know what radius curves you're using. So if you're unsure about radius curves, please look at our video which is named Trak Specification. When fitting the track to the brackets, always ensure the bolt is coming up through the last pair of sleepers of your track. And that again is the same with RTR 01. And when securing RTR 01, and indeed any bracket to the wall or ceiling, push the bracket quite firmly against the wall for at least 10 seconds. This enables the double-sided tape to bond properly with the surface of the wall. Now put in your RTR 01s at a maximum spacing of 168 millimeters. That's one track length. This is very important. If you try and make this a longer distance, then the track does start to move as the train goes over it. It could damage the track, and it could well bring the whole lot off the wall. When fitting RTR 01s to the track, ensure the track is in line with the cotton, and then just slide the RTR 01 in position so the holes line up with the ends of the sleepers, and give it a good push for 10 seconds, making sure the double-sided tape bonds with the track. And then with your screws, you do one track at a time, putting your screw up through the slot, making sure it goes into the pair of tracks each side of the connector. Don't tighten one up until you've got the other screw in position. And there's a bit of play each way on the bracket to enable you, and there's also the bracket's got a little bit of a slot enabling you to bring the other screw up through the other pair of sleepers on the other side of the connector. And when both screws are in position and you're happy that they've come up right, you then check that the end of the sleepers are right on the end of the RTR 01 bracket, and then you can just do them up nice and snug with a posi pan through like that. Now we're using radius 2 going down to radius 1 curves on the ceiling, so this track length is 809 millimeters, which is 4 whole track lengths plus a track of 139 millimeters long. That's a specially made track which you can do yourself, or if you go to a good modelling shop, they will cut a track length for you. If you were using what's in the instructions, you will see this track is 943 millimeters long, which is 5 track lengths plus a specially made one of 105 millimeters. Again, you can get this cut in the shop. Bearing in mind you need 2 of these tracks because there's one on the other return on the other end as well. So we've now got this straight, which is the required straight for radius 2 dropping to radius 1. These measurements can also be found on the website. There is a plan showing Trak Kit 5 using radius 2 and radius 1, and you can download that plan, and it gives you all the lengths of the measurements for the straight as well as the curves coming off the wall. We now tighten the posi pan bolts with holding the nuts with your finger, checking that the nut is in the middle of the rail and the sleepers are flush with the edge of the bracket, and we just go along giving them a little tight and making sure they're nice and tight, but not over tightening, because this will damage the sleepers on the track. So it's just make sure they're nice and snug. Don't do the end ones, always leave them loose because it then enables you to put in your next track piece. So the first thing we're doing is we're just sliding a Art 45. In this case we're using radius 2 curve, and we just slide it in, and every time just run your fingers over the top to check that both spade connectors have connected nicely and there's no step on the top of the rails. Now what we need to do now is we need to position this end of this correctly. And we do this because we know the radius you're using, and because we know the radius we know the measurement from here to the wall. Now this is very crucial that you follow these measurements and you keep to the same radius and you know which radius you're using, because every time you fit a track you're either securing it to the wall or you're securing it to the ceiling, and this track has got to come the whole way round and join back onto the wall bracket RTR 14 exactly 67 millimeters beside the other track. So if you don't, you haven't got the luxury of, when you get there, if it doesn't line up you can't move anything because it's all fixed. So it's very, very important to stick to these measurements that we're going to give you. So in this example we are using radius 2, dropping to radius 1. Your instructions show it radius 3 to radius 2. I'm going to give you the measurements for both. If you want to use radius 2 and radius 1, as I said, there is a plan on the website, Trak Kit 5, radius 2, radius 1. So this is the distance you take coming straight off the wall, and you're measuring an imaginary point between the ends of the track. Ignore the spade connector, so you're drawing a line between the ends of the track and you're measuring out from the wall. So this needs to be at a position of 162 millimeters. So you just simply come from the wall and you move your curve to 162. And if this was radius 3, because the curve's bigger track, it would be 182 millimeters. So radius 2, 162, radius 3, 182 millimeters. This next part can be seen on page 8 of your main instruction sheet, and basically we're fitting RTR06 to the ceiling using a cotton plumb line, tying just a little M4 nut on the end of a piece of cotton, and then you're sticking the bracket RTR06 onto the ceiling with the cotton running down right through the centre of the end of the track. And then when this positioned rightly, you just push it up onto the ceiling. Again, giving it a nice firm push for at least 10 seconds. Maybe not pushing it as hard as you'd push it against the wall, because ceilings tend not to be as strong as walls. So just give it a nice little snug push, allowing the tape to bond with the ceiling. And then this cotton line, as I say, the nut should be right at the end of the track. So the track we know is in position because we measured it from the wall, and now we've put RTR06 in position directly above it. With ceiling support arches, the ceiling bracket is always in line with the end of the track, and you can do this by eye as you stick it to the ceiling. We now know that we've positioned the end of this curve in the right position horizontally, and we've put the ceiling support arch bracket directly above it. We now need to support the curve in the correct position vertically, and we do that by building the ceiling support arch at the right length that it supports the curve at the right height. With a flat ceiling, the distance is 280 mm in this case, or X, whatever you've measured down with the track in the first place. So with a flat ceiling, it's pretty easy to do. We're just going to cut them all so they support the curve at 280 mm. If this isn't the case and the ceiling does in fact slope, then at every point you're going to have to take a measurement, and you just put a spirit level along the curve, holding the curve horizontally, and then you just measure up to the ceiling at each point. you probably will need 2 people to help you with this. Now I'm going to demonstrate to you how to build the bottom part of the ceiling support arch so it will support your track 280mm from the ceiling. This is shown on page 8 of your main instructions. What we do is we take RTR04 and we subtract 109mm off 280, which gives 171mm. And what we do is we measure from the end with the eye, and we measure down 171mm, and that is where we mark RTR 04. 171. So we put a pencil mark there, and then with tin snips we cut a further 7mm or so below that line. Again, front eye at the top, pencil, and then cut underneath it. So we've got the eye at the top, we've marked down 171mm, and we've cut just below that line. You now pass RTR04 through the plates of RTR05, and using M4x8mm bolts, which are 2mm bigger than the ones you're using at the track, you bolt them each side of RTR04 with your pencil mark just coming into view at the bottom of the plate. And then you tighten these bolts up, making sure that RTR comes nice vertically up from the bracket. The reason we've cut RTR04 slightly longer is to allow for any adjustment. You might not have bent these exactly to the nearest millimetre, and the ceiling might not be completely flat. So when the track's in place, it allows for a little bit of adjustment at a later date. So with the first ceiling arch fitted at the right length, holding the track at the right height, we now tighten all the posi pans up. We tighten the ones at the track ends. We tighten up the tension, the adjusting screws, make sure they're nice and tight, and as important, make sure the one going to the ceiling's nice and tight. You need to be in a position where you can look down on the track and check that the nuts have come up through each side of the track junction at the pair of sleepers right at the ends of the curves, and that also when you do up the bolts, the nuts must be in the middle of the 2 rails. When you've connected this ARC 45 and you've done these nuts up and these bolts and this one at the top, if the support bracket down has got any slight bend in it, or you haven't bent this straight, or indeed you haven't exactly put it above the track end, the action of doing all this will have moved this. So before we go take the next measurement from here to the wall, it's very important to reposition the first one. So the track now, the point needs to be an imaginary line between the 2 bolts, because they're going up through the track in the middle of the track. So imaginary line between the 2 tracks, and that needs to be 162mm for radius 2, or 182mm for radius 3. So you've got to look down on that, and you have to basically check that you've got 162, and if not, you have to move, and you literally are bending the bracket so it absolutely is 162. So when that position is correct on that one, you're now in a position to measure out with this one, and this one is for radius 2 is 472, and if it was radius 3 it would be 539. So if that's not quite correct, then you've got to twist it there. So you've got to keep going back and checking both of them. You need to have both these measurements correct, and the way you change either of them is you just literally are turning the bracket around this point here. And again, using a plumb line to fit RTR06 onto the ceiling directly above the track, pushing nicely up onto the ceiling to get a good bonding with the double-sided tape. With the second ceiling support arch fitted and the track running horizontally, We now again measure and check this position. So with the nuts, bolts done up, and each side of the track connector, and you've done up these nuts and you've done up the sealing nuts, you take a measurement from the middle between the two bolts back to the sealing, and this is the same. So for radius 2 it's 472, radius 3 it's 539. And only when you're happy with this, you've bent this bracket so it's holding there on its own, you then can go out to the end of the track and take the measurement there. You don't need to touch this one, that's held in place unless you've accidentally hit the track badly and maybe moved it. It should be in the right position. So now you're measuring at the end of the track, and at this position, for radius 2 it's 782 millimeters, and for radius 3 it's 896 millimeters, and that's coming straight out from the wall. And only when you're happy with both those measurements are correct, you then drop down your plumb line to fit your next sealing arch. We're now fitting our fourth arc 45 curve, which means we're halfway round the curve. So we're the furthest out from the wall that we're going to come. And with the third sealing support arch fitted and this position again checked, 782 for radius 2 and 896 for radius 3, and you're happy with that position, and you've measured this from the wall, which is the radius 2 would be 910 millimeters from the center of the track to the wall, and if this was radius 3 it would be 1044 millimeters. So with those two measurements correct, don't worry about these two brackets, they'll stay in position. Then you're ready to drop a plumb line again for your fourth sealing arch. When fitting these arc 45s, the measurements we're giving you are very easy to achieve, and it should almost fall into place. If for any reason you're struggling to get these measurements, it could well be that you've used the wrong arc 45 radius curve. You could have picked up an incorrect radius. This is very easy to do because by sight they're quite difficult to tell apart from each other. Do check our track specification video and do make sure that you have got the correct radiuses, because trying to do the measurements with the wrong radius you could well damage the track. We're now heading back towards the wall. So with this bracket in position, all tightened, and you've measured 910 millimeters off the wall with radius 2 or 1044 with radius 3, we're now measuring the center of this track back to the wall, and that is exactly the same as this bracket here. So it should be exactly the same measurement as this bracket, which is 782 millimeters for radius 2 and 896 millimeters for radius 3. Now 3/4 of the way round the curve, we've used up 6 arc 45s, and now we're going to, after this one, we're going to drop a radius and go the other way to go back to our wall bracket RTR 14. So this position here is exactly the same off the wall as this bracket here. So the bracket here was 400 for radius 2 was 472 millimeters. So you measure from the wall out to the middle of the track, and it should be 472. Spot on. And the other measurement that's worth doing at this point is the diameter of the curve. The radius 2, the radius is 438 millimeters, so the diameter would be 876. So from the middle of the curve, that end to that end, should be 876 millimeters. It's just a good check to check that you're on course, which is fine. Now, if this was radius 3 we were putting up, then the distance from the wall would be 539 millimeters, again the same as that bracket there. And the radius of radius 3 is 505, so the diameter would be 1010mm. We've now come to quite an important stage for Trak Kit 5 and the return loop. Now we've put this ceiling support arch on, we've now got just two more Arc 45s, which is dropping a radius. So in this case radius 2 we're dropping to radius 1. And so this arc here has got to come back to RTR 14. So rather than putting one more on, although we want you to do this as accurately as possible, measuring everything out from the wall as accurate as possible, there is a slight chance that this position is out by a few millimetres. So the fact it's out by a few millimetres, if we put in the last two Arc 45s, then any discrepancy in this position will be taken over two lengths. So when we put in the last, drop in the radius, we put the last two 45s, we're not going to measure this point. We're just going to put in the two, connect the two curves, and then we're just going to drop a cotton line down to wherever the junction is to fit our very last ceiling support arch. So with the last two tracks in position, you just drop a plumb line down to the centre of the track connection, with the cotton in the middle of the wherever that junction is fitted and fallen with the two Arc 45s, and you put on your ceiling support bracket for your very last ceiling arch. When it comes to fitting this last ceiling support arch, you do need to dismantle the bottom end to get it over the track and then connect it back up again with the adjustable screws. With all ceiling support arches in place, the next thing to do is to stand back in the room and with the track at eye level, follow the loop around and check that the track is completely level. And if any of the brackets need adjusting, this is the time to just come along with your screwdriver, undo the screws and adjust the bracket either up or down to give a nice level track. Don't worry too much about the track in between the Arc 45s, as we are going to now put in Arc 22.5 brackets to support this bit. The first Arc 22.5 bracket to fit is the wall bracket, RTR 07 if it's radius 2 or RTR 21 if it's radius 3. And it's important to note with this bracket that the sleepers of the track do come over the edge of the bracket. The next thing to fit is a ceiling cord arch. This is found on page 10 of your main instructions. And what you need to do is to fit RTR 09 onto the ceiling, again using a plumb line with a little M4 nut tied on the end of a piece of cotton. And this runs through exactly the track at Arc 22.5. With most tracks you will see a gap in the railway sleepers at this position, even if it's a full double length track. And as I say, you just nicely put the RTR 09 onto the ceiling directly above Arc 22.5, and again nicely firm push up onto the ceiling to fit the bracket. With the ceiling cord arches, the bracket always lies at 90 degrees to the track direction. With RTR 08 now on the ceiling, you can now fit RTR 09, doing up the posi-pan bolts, holding the nuts in the middle between the two rails and the bracket itself in line with the sleepers. We now measure from the bottom of the track to the ceiling, which is 280mm in this case with a flat ceiling, and this gives us the length that we need to cut the 3mm cord that is supplied with the kit. When it comes to cutting the 3mm cord for your ceiling arches, the length you need to cut it is 3 times the distance from the track to the ceiling plus 70mm. So 280 times 3 plus 70 is 910mm. So we measure out 910mm of cord. Now to cut this cord, don't be tempted to just cut it with a knife. It will fray and it will make it virtually impossible to put the cord through the brackets of the ceiling arch. So what you need to do before you cut it is you need to pull it as tight as you can between your fingers, and with it pulled tight across your fingers, roll the insulating tape tightly round the string, as absolutely as tight as possible. And the idea being that it leaves, it basically pulls as tight as you can, and then with a knife and a chopping board you cut right the way down through the middle of the insulating tape, leaving a nice tight shoelace type finish. And that is much easier to pass it through the holes, because the holes are quite tight on the bracket, and by the time you've painted them there really isn't a lot of room for this cord to pass through. That ceiling, there's no reason why you can't cut all 7 bits of cord for the 7 cord arches that are required for the return. And if the ceiling's of the same level on your other return, you could cut another 7 pieces of cord for those brackets as well. With the cord cut to length, we then pass it through RTR09, putting a knot on the end, and we've removed the tape off the end of the cord, and we then just pull that tight. Again, referring to page 10 of your main instructions, we pass the cord through holes 4, 5 and 6 of RTR10, and then 7 and 8 of RTR08, and we pull the string so the RTR10 is just coming up at about 20 degrees off the horizontal. We then put the cord through holes 9, 10 and 11 of RTR10, and we make it so it's now parallel with the track, and then pass the cord back through the same way as the other cord going through with the knot, and then we tension it. But the idea of this tension is all it's doing is supporting the track when a train runs over it. It's not in any way lifting the track up, it's all fairly loose. The problem is if you pull this too tight, these cords, because it's fixed solid here, you'll put too much stress on this tape and it will pull it off the ceiling. It might not pull it off straight away, but over a period of time you'll find that the bracket will just come away from the ceiling. So it really is quite relaxed. There's in no way is this lifting the track up, it is just supporting, so if a train goes over it, it then has a little bit of tension. And when you're happy with that tension, you then just wrap the cord around and go working up to the ceiling, and then there's some notches on the top and you just tie one off on the notch, and then you can take the tape off the end if you wish. We now fit the remaining 6 cord arches at arc 22.5. With your first loop now finished, the next thing is just to run an empty carriage around the circuit, listening at every track joint to make sure that there's no step and they've gone in correctly. So just push a carriage around. Not letting it go off the end. And that's the first hoop finished. Page 19 of your supplement sheet shows this now just going straight back into a return curve. So from this point it's just this outside track is just carrying on at the, well, here radius 1, in your instructions radius 2, and then back to radius 3 to return back to here. But what we're going to do is we're going to carry on these tracks down the wall just a little bit, because we've got quite a nice long wall and we just want to make the circuit a little bit larger. So this is purely a choice. Now you could just extend the track using RTR 14s. You could just have 2 more track lengths coming out and put another RTR 14, just simply following the cotton. to make it a little bit more interesting, we're not going to do that. We're going to put the inner track along the cotton using RTR01s, and we're going to suspend the outer track off the ceiling using a bridge, just to make a little bit of interest as the train goes by. So we're using 4 track lengths here, which is a long track or 2 double tracks, and we're putting that, we're using an RTR14 on the end, exactly the same as this. So we're moving this down to here, and then we're going to do the return curves here. So we push that firmly onto the ceiling, and we're just running along the cotton. So this is staying 280 millimeters from the ceiling. And adding your 3 supporting wall brackets, RTR01s, ensuring that the end of the sleepers is level with the end of the bracket, and then you just snug up all the posi pan 6 mils. So the inner track's nicely secured, nice straight line, still running with the cotton. Now fit another double piece of track, exactly the same length, on the outer between your 2 RTR14s. Always making sure that you bring the bolts on the RTR14 up through the pair of sleepers each side of the track connector. And again on the other end, that you've got them on the arse pair of sleepers waiting to connect to the curves later on. We're now fitting a bridge to the outer track. It's purely for a decorative effect. The length of the bridge is exactly 2 track lengths long, and the instructions on how to put this up are on page 7 of your main instructions, but this is a bridge R202-03. So we first of all put 03 onto the track, and we do it up checking that the nuts are in the middle of the track, so the track is running right down the middle of the bridge. Now use the bridge on the track, RTR03 on the track, to position the ceiling bracket RTR02, and the idea is that the cotton runs down the side of the bridge, right in the middle of the bridge, but running down the side, and again a plumb line, and the bracket is going across the track at 90 degrees. And when you're happy with that, it's very important again to give a nice pressure, pushing up onto the ceiling for at least 10 seconds, making sure that both of the double-sided tape bond with the ceiling. And now that bracket is in place. And again on page 7 of the main instructions, you pass the string, the cord, 3mm cord, which you have cut 3 times the length distance from the track plus 300mm, which is 1140mm. So that's the length of cord, and you pass that through the ceiling bracket with a knot on the end of it to stop it coming back. And then you're on the instructions, it is holes coming out of hole 2 on the instructions, and it's just weave, so it's coming out of hole 2, 3, out again of 4, back into 5, out of 6, and back into 7. When you've done 2, 3 and 4, this is enough so that you can now tension this first piece of cord. We've already done the back, so we're now doing the front, but again it mustn't be too tight. If it's too tight, it will put too much stress, because the track's fixed each side, so if you put too much stress on your double-sided tape, it will pull this bracket off the ceiling over a period of time. So you just want to lift it up so the track, keeping an eye on the cotton, so it's just nice and level with the cotton. It's not in any way lifting the track up, it's just to support it as the train goes over. And now with the cord going through the last 3 holes, pulling it nice and tight, because it is grabbed quite well there, so you don't have any problems there, so there's no slack as it goes along the bridge. It's weaving between the holes. You're then going back, passing the cord back through the same way as the other ones coming out of the bracket, and then again you're tensioning this so it's just taking the weight of the bridge, so that basically both tracks are absolutely lovely in line. So really all the string's doing is just bearing the weight of the bridge, and it's brought the track back up square, and that's plenty tight enough. You really don't want it any tighter than that, and it's exactly the same as your ceiling cord arches. You wrap it around and then you do it off on the notches at the top. The cutting length is a little bit hit and miss depending on the height, so you might have to cut the string at this stage. It might be a little bit too long. Depending on what height you've got, the 3 times plus adding 300mm can vary a little bit. And that's your bridge R2R0203 fitted. Okay, so we've put our bridge in and we've got to a bracket RTR14, and at this point we're going to do our return loop back to RTR14 to close the circuit. Now on this side we were using radius 2 going down to radius 1, so we had a track length going along the cotton of 809mm. On this side, just because we've got a bigger ceiling space and just to make it a little bit more interesting, plus its track I've got available, I'm actually going to do radius 3 dropping to radius 2. So this track length along the cotton needs to be 943mm long. We now fit the first 6 Arc 45 curves using the ceiling support arches and measuring each track end from the wall. And now you fit the last 2 Arc 45s at the reduced radius. Now you fit the final ceiling support arch. We now stand back in the room and take an eye view level of the track, checking that the track is nice and flat and level. And if there's any problems at all, then you adjust any of the ceiling support arches with the adjust and slide them up and down. With the level track, we now fit the Arc 22.5 brackets, starting with the wall bracket, which is RTR21 in this case with radius 3 curves, and then the 7 ceiling cord arches. When fitting ceiling support arches and ceiling cord arches, it's nice if you've got a nice stable platform where you're just above track level. When it's coming to putting a cotton line and putting something on the ceiling, it's just a very nice position to be in. But be very careful when you bring your head up that you don't clout any of the head on any of the brackets, because you will bend them. And again, with an empty carriage, run it round the track, listening at each track joint to check that the joints have gone in correctly and there's no excessive noise. And that's your track completed. With any power track, the connector block must come away from the wall. And in this example, we've run the track over a doorway. So running the lead down the side of the door frame is quite a nice place to put it. And with a little bit of filler, you can disguise it completely. Remember, if you have young children in the room, please put the transformer out of their reach so you can set a nice safe speed for the train.